I'm Stuart Batty, and if you're a woodturner, you've likely heard of my technique, negative rake scraping. When I developed the 40/40 grind for the bowl gouge in 1981, I stopped honing. So I used to take my gouge and then my chisels, including my beating and potting tool and my skew chisel, directly off the grinder. I kept the grinder close to where I worked and I stopped honing. So I stopped taking a slipstone and taking the burr off. I simply took the blade, whichever one I'm using, directly off the grindstone. Now at that time, my dad, all the other professional turners, including Richard Raffin and Ray Key, they all honed their gouges and chisels. And for me, I didn't find any benefit. So that meant every time I picked up a tool, it already had a burr on it directly from the grindstone. When I came to thinking about surfacing these types of wood, I'm thinking I can't use a conventional scraper. The reason being is the burr edge, and even if you hone it off, is parallel to the base of the tool. So the geometry of it makes it attracted to dense woods, to end grain, to broken surfaces, and especially any wood that's flexible and thin. So if I was to attempt to clean up this surface with a conventional scraper, I'd be fighting the tool wanting to grab at the wood and the wood wanting to climb onto the tool, no matter what the angle. Because this tool can be used from 50-degree included angle right the way up to 80. It can be used with and without a burr. So at that time, I had a lot of beating and potting tools because I used to teach a lot of students. So I had a handful of beating and potting tools. I sharpened it the usual way, straight off the grinder. And because it's got a different angle at the top, that's the negative angle here, to the base of the tool. When I lay it flat on the tool rest, it's already got a negative angle. The burr was already on there, and I wasn't deliberately leaving a burr on there. I'm just thinking, hey, it's a negative angle, so it won't be aggressive, and let's see what it does. I work a little area of the burr, and it is fantastic. So I start again with the same chisel. I work a little bit more, and it's not great. So I realized, well, the tool is dull. And I'm only using M2 steel, and it's only 3/8 of an inch wide. So two things working against me, a low-grade steel and not a very wide blade. So as I sharpen it again, I now have a fresh burr. I work an area, it's fantastic. I work another area, it's no good. So I sharpen it again. And then I realize it isn't that I'm sharpening it that's making the difference. It's that I have a burr on top of the chisel. It's the burr that's working. That burr is a form of hard abrasion. Think about sandpaper. It flexes. Power sanding. It flexes. Think about a grinding wheel. It doesn't flex. So when I'm grinding the steel, it doesn't flex and it forms the blade into the shape I want. When I use a burr on the front of this chisel, it's a hard abrasive. It isn't scraping per se, it's abrasion. And that burr is working like an abrasive that doesn't flex, and it abrades the surface down, makes it flawless. But once that burr is gone, it is now technically scraping without a burr, and it then starts to lift the grain. So realizing that, I changed over to going to a wider chisel, like a skew, and then eventually I went to higher grades. So the wider the width, the higher the grade of steel, the longer the burr lasts, the longer I can work. And you can go to the extreme where you can get wider and wider. So this is one of our replaceable blade negative rakes, and here I've got over 3 inches of surface contact. If you were to take 3 inches of surface contact with a conventional scraper on such a piece of wood like this, it would be absolutely uncontrollable. But on this, it doesn't matter. I can work this whole surface with this long edge and have no problems in getting a perfectly smooth, accurate surface, flawless, to the point where I could sand it with 180 or 220 grit by hand and keep the super sharp edges. I can also, which I'll do in the near future, I'll finish this piece, I can turn this down to 1/8 of an inch, which is extremely hard with a gouge and impossible with a conventional scraper. But the negative rake is a neutral tool. It doesn't pull or push the wood away as long as it's got a burr. The burr is gone, you have to push it in to get a reaction. That pushing in creates harmonics and it just tears up the surface. So the secret of negative rake is the secondary angle on the top, a bevel underneath that creates the burr. The lower the angle, included angle, the bigger the burr. The coarser the grinding wheel, the bigger the burr. The harder I push it into the grinder, the bigger the burr. However, as long as you've got a burr of any type and it's got a negative angle, I can work this kind of surface flawlessly. So let's move on and show you how this interacts on pure end grain of lignum vitae, which is an extremely dense wood, and we'll show you the comparison between conventional and negative rake and the geometry and why one works and why one is uncontrollable. So here I have lignum vitae. It is one of the densest woods in the world. with a specific gravity of 1.2, which means it definitely doesn't float. Now, we've got a grain format where this is spindle turning and the grain is running along the bed of the lathe. And then this is side grain bowl turning format where the grain is running at 90 degrees to that. So this grain is rotating and it creates end grain, side grain, end grain, side grain. And that's what I call mixed grain, but you have to treat it as end grain. So we'll come back to this one in a little bit and we'll talk about this one for now. Now, on the side grain here, I haven't quite got it down to the round, so I'm going to take a spindle roughing gouge. It'll be very quick, very efficient at taking that down to the round. Will give me a great finish. Then I'll show across the end grain how I'd clean that up with a bowl gouge with a 40-40 grind. However, I can still improve upon the finish with the negative rake, and I'll also show you the interaction between negative rake on a super dense end grain versus a conventional scraper, which would be somewhat terrifying to be able to use this on the end grain of this lignum vitae. So taking this down to the round, this has a 40-degree bevel angle. It's ground straight across. Let's put it in a handle and take this down to the round. Now, obviously, spindle roughing gouge. Its original name was a roughing out gouge, but that's not a great name for something that should never be used on a bowl. We're going to take this area down the round, just interacting with side grain. This tool should never interact with end grain. You will definitely get a catch. Still left with some of the chuck mark in there where it dug in, but we're going to leave that where it is. And this finish is satisfactory off the spindle roughing gouge. Don't need to do any more with that. Let's talk about the end grain here. So this is pure end grain. I'm going to clean this up initially with a 40-40 grind. It'll do a fantastic job because the 40-40 grind is very unusual. The reason it's unusual is it slices with the 40-degree bevel nose and with a 40-degree bevel angle wing and a 40-degree from the wing up, from the center up for the wing, making an 80-degree included angle here to here. This will give me a superb finish on here, but not perfect. Negative rake can make it perfect, and conventional scraping would not be suitable on this whatsoever. So let's just clean that up and show you this cut. So checking my bevel in line, where you can clean up this surface. Now watch at the end of the cut how I disengage the wing. So as I get close to the end of the cut here, I go from peeling with the wing to slicing only with the nose right there. So that's given me a very nice finish on the end grain here. But how perfect is it? So I can feel some small undulations there off the gouge. That's just normal. And will this stand out? For sure. But if I want to get it better, I want to be able to finish this and make it perfectly flat, say, with some other form of finishing and not just sanding. Then that's where I'm going to pick up negative rake scraping. But before we do that, let's look at the comparison between negative rake and a conventional scraper. So here I have three conventional scrapers. These are the scrapers I grew up with as a young turner. These are old Sorby ones, but they're still available today. However, they're not as effective as we used to think they are. So this one here has a 60-degree bevel. This one has a 70, and this one has an 80. I would use an 80 on the denser woods, 70 on medium wood like oak, and then soft woods and really soft maples, I would use a 60. If I'm going into side grain, I would leave the burr on. If I'm going into end grain, I would hone the burr off. And I'm going to show you the different reactions between these on this super exotic dense wood here, and I'm actually not going to do it whilst it's turning. You'll see that they're super aggressive. If I try to work this surface with all of these, including the 80 degrees without the burr, it gets to be somewhat uncontrollable. And also, these require a longer overhang than the handle that came with them. I would always recommend a longer handle for conventional scrapers than definitely for negative rake. So starting with the 60 degree here, let's just bring it up to the surface here and let's show you what 60 degrees looks like. So here we've got a 60-degree included angle. That's from the top surface to here. If I put a protractor on there, it would measure at 60. But as we bring this into the surface here and we just present it against here, you'll see it start to pull the tool and hold it. It'll actually rip it right out of my hand. So 60 degrees with a burr on there, uncontrollable. And if I'm firing up a 3 horsepower motor and I try to skim that surface, it would be very scary. Same what's going to happen if we go to the 70, it's still going to react the same. So as I bring it in, you can see it bites on the chisel real hard, and it's pulling at it without me doing anything. It's just pulling it out my hand, especially being such a wide blade. This would be super aggressive. So again, this still has a burr on it and it's 70 degrees. Let's go to 80 without the burr. So you get a slightly different reaction, but it's still similar. It still grabs on it and pulls a chisel in. You can see it pulling it in. It's very different to negative rake. So even if I'm cautious and careful, I'll be working that surface and all of a sudden it'll just self-feed in, give you a hell of a fright, and you got a massive chunk out, might even pull a piece of wood off the lathe. It's just not suitable to use conventional scrapers into super exotic woods. Now I might think, well, I don't turn lignin bead. It'll be similar on woods like ash, oak, elm. The negative rake is far superior, far more controllable, easy to sharpen, very fast, and give me a flawless finish on there. So let's move these out the way for a second and let's bring up negative rake. So the included angle on negative rake can be anywhere between 40 and 70. If you make this angle greater than 70, then the burr you create is just too small to use and it wears out really quick. So because we're relying 100% on this burr, and I can clearly feel this burr on here, and I've got a 40-degree included angle. It's also fairly wide, and it's a pretty exotic steel. The old tools were old high carbon tool steel. This is 10V. It's going to hold an edge for quite some time. I'd probably get 90 seconds of really good premium working time before I need to worry about putting a new burr on this. Now look at as I place this onto the wood, it'll be very different. So let's make sure we do put a handle on it. The burr is facing up, and then this will work this. See how it's not pulling the tool out of my hand at all. I am not doing anything other than balancing it, and the chisel stays still. It is not grabbing it. So let's go back and show you again. This is 80 degrees, twice the angle, and no burr. Let's bring up the 80 degrees, and look how it grabs it instantaneously. It's pulling it out of my hand. I can balance it there, and you can see it pulling it in. Let's go back again and confirm that. Here's negative rake. I'm holding it very lightly, and it's not moving it. And you say, well, got a longer handle. Hell, let's just take the handle off. And nothing happens. And this is geometry. It is not pulling on that burr. So let's show you that with my thumbnail, the difference. So let's take a 70 degrees with a burr, and watch what I can do with my thumbnail here. I can pull that burr along and hold it with my little finger. That's how powerful it is when the burr is parallel to the surface it's resting on. And even though people say, oh, to make this negative rake, point it downhill, that's kind of stupid. We always point these downhill. It doesn't make it negative rake. To make it negative rake, the base angle and the secondary angle must be different. This doesn't have a secondary angle. As you can see, I can grab that burr and I can pull this along. Let's do the same with a negative rake. So let's take, you can see it already moved quite a bit of wood. Let's take that off. Let's see if I can move it with the burr. And it has a much bigger burr because it's a 40-degree burr. I cannot, with my nail, pull this chisel no matter how hard I try. And that burr is big, it will not self-feed. This is the difference between negative rake and conventional. So let's show you the two from above. See, one has a single angle, one has a dual angle. So let's show you this one in action on here whilst it's spinning with 3 horsepower. I just nowadays don't have enough nerve to use a conventional scraper on such a wood like this. So we can use a relatively short handle, but I do recommend using a handle, even though we're quite close and the overhang ratio only needs to be 3:1 for negative rake. I still recommend using a handle. Now this has a very slight dome in it because if you're completely straight across, then it's easy to catch a lead or trail edge as we're pulling across. Now this is relatively flat off the gouge, but I got a little high spot when I went across. Let's make it absolutely flawless using negative rake. So I'm running at 2000 RPM here. And this is the thing, make sure we're at the right height. So we can see we're a little bit low. So let's adjust the height up a small amount. So we want to be cutting on center. Now, negative rake is unusual in one way compared to conventional scrapers. And what I mean by that, with a conventional scraper, if I go past center, nothing happens. If I go past center with a negative rake, it'll still work the other side. So we want to work to the center and back, to the center and back. Do not take the chisel past center because it'll interact with the other side and it'll want to throw the chisel over. Make sure the burr is up. There it is. And then let's work this back and forth. So there's my high spot. Let's work that down, and you can see I'm taking out all my gouge tool marks without any problems whatsoever, and it is not aggressive, and it is not tearing the grain. Let's take away the dust so you can see that. Now you're not going to see big shavings on end grain because they're going to fracture off. The denser the wood, the easier it fractures off. And I go to the center. Now sometimes I'll go a little bit past the center with a tiny bit of the blade, not giving away my leverage. I can work this down to an absolutely flawless surface. And let's stop there and have a look at that. So you can see the surface. So here, this is a close-up view of that lignin vitae, and you can see the end grain is absolutely flawless on this. So this would be very easy to sand with the light grade. Maybe it's a 180, 220, and we've got it perfectly flat across the surface now. So good to go. So let's swap out for the other different grain format for the lignin vitae. So here, this is the format of a mini bowl, but I just want to show how it interacts the conventional scraper versus the negative rake scraper on the outside of here. Now this is the grain running at 90 degrees, so there's no curvature or anything on this right now. So it's giving you the grain that is all vertical on this side where the grain is climbing up, and then this side the grain is getting shorter. Same on this side. The grain is climbing up in one direction and then getting shorter on the other. If you've got curvature or a taper on this, then the grain is always going uphill in some format. But let's show you the difference between cutting this with a gouge, then interacting with a conventional scraper, and then with a negative rake scraper. Now I'm cutting towards a chuck, so I've got to be careful here as I get towards the end. I'll need to stop a little bit short because I don't want to run into my chuck here. And let's make sure we are truly secure on here. One more quick check on here. And we're going to use a 40-40 just to make it parallel right now. So setting my 40-40 at the end here, I got to be careful I don't run into the chuck, so I will stop a little bit short, setting myself up just to lean and do the cut. Not going to take a lot off this, but let's go for just a nice straight parallel cut. Going down the end here because we don't want to break through, and I'm going to stop a tiny bit short, and we'll get that with the negative rake. So although I've got a good clean cut with the gouge here, let's see what we get when we bring up a conventional scraper versus a negative rake. But right now I'm going to take that corner off with negative rake because it's going to be really quick and easy, and that way it's not in the way. And then let's show you how the conventional scraper interacts with this. I put a fresh burr on this since before so I can feel it. Checking it, and they use it right at the very end where this is going to be very good. Right there, I can work away from the chuck and not get too close. So let's grab a negative rake on this, and let's grab a 70 degree and an 80 degree, one with a burr and one without a burr, and show you how it interacts with this. But again, I'm not going to do this whilst it's turning because it's going to want to pull the tool out of my hand or pull a piece of wood off the lathe. So let's start with the 70 degree here. This does have a burr on the top. I can feel it. And it's got a 70 degree included angle from here to here. And this one is skewed, so let's bring it in from the side, and let's show you when I bring it in what result we get. So we're going to do this by hand. I'm going to move this out the way. Now, as I said, side grain, end grain, side grain, end grain, it's mixed grain. So if we present this on the side grain, it's going to be okay initially here. You see it'll actually work it. Nothing's happening, but as we get into the end grain, it's starting to pull the chisel in more and more, and you can see it's actually just grabbing right at it, and that's a 70 degree. And if I was spinning at 3 horsepower, 2000 RPM, that'd be super aggressive. Let's go to the 80 degree, which is obviously a duller, more suited angle, and the burr has been honed off on this. Let's take the other side of the wood. So again, on the side grain here, it's probably going to be okay. So not too bad. The tool's not lifting, not doing much on the side grain. But as we go around, we get into pure end grain, it's starting to grab more. And although not grabbing as much, it's definitely still aggressive. You can hear it pulling in, being much more aggressive. So let's do a comparison whilst it's stationary with the negative rake. Let's use the area of the negative rake that hasn't been used yet at all. And let's take that around. So on the side grain, end grain, it's just sitting here. It's neither pulling. Here, I'm not needing to use my thumb on top. It's not interacting in the same way at all. It's very neutral. And this chisel can be used flat or slightly uphill. Not recommended to point uphill very much at all because you don't want to turn it into a skew chisel. We're using it as a form of abrasion scraping here. And let's try it whilst it's running. So running at 2000 RPM. Now we can see we've got a little bit of a taper on that from my gouge cut. But let's show you here on this surface here how this interacts with this mixed grain. And here it's really good, cutting on there really nicely. So I'm not being aggressive here, just skimming the surface. And so it's taking out the gouge marks without any problems at all. So all those little small undulations you get from using the gouge, and it's just removing quite a bit of material. If you were trying to sand this amount of material off with sandpaper and lignin bead dye being very oily, since it's amazingly oily, that would be a lot of material to remove, and you'd have to use a fairly coarse paper. So this has cleaned this up really flawlessly right across the surface here. See, we have a really clean surface. And that'll work even better on a curved surface. So just showing the interaction between conventional scrapers, negative rake scraping into pure end grain and into mixed grain. And you can see it's quite a different result between the two styles of turning, and that we can get a flawless finish under great control using negative rake, whereas the conventional scrapers would just simply be too aggressive. So here I have a roughed out box, and this is where negative rake scraping is exceptional. It's exceptional at shaping the final shape inside a box, cleaning up the end grain to reduce your sanding, because sanding inside here is difficult because limited access, both on the lid and on the base. And also it's great at cleaning up the very final cut on the end grain on the lid and the base. We can end up with an exceptional finish, exceptional shape, and reduce the sanding by a tremendous amount. This one is one that I turned and roughed out a while back, so we'll use this. We have the lid and we have the base here. So let's start off with the lid first, because I'm going to make the wall a little bit thinner now, clean up the bottom, and then put the male section of the fit to the base on this. Then we'll do the same on the bottom afterwards, and then we'll jam chuck it so that we can finish off the top using a friction fit. So let's put this in the chuck, and let's show you how negative rake scraping is really good on pure end grain inside a box. Now I'm setting my tool rest a little bit further back than might seem normal, because we have quite a long bevel angle to get a nice big burr on this round bar negative rake scraper. The problem with a square bar negative rake scraper is it doesn't fit into the corner very well because of the curvature, and this isn't obviously curved here, it's square, so it doesn't get into the corner as well. The round bar is also very strong. This is 9/16. It's 10V, so holds an edge for quite some time. It's already got the burr on it. I can use it across the bottom and to clean up the sidewall and to clean up the end grain here. Right now they've just been rough turned straight off the gouge, and the gouge gives an okay finish, but you can't get the flawless shape that you want with the gouge. It's not ideal into end grain. So checking my height, I should be able to use my chisel relatively flat. You can go uphill a few degrees, downhill a few degrees, but we want to work with a negative rake scraper relatively flat to the lathe bed. Check to see which side the burr is. It's on this side. Now obviously we've got a little bit of wall thickness to remove here. Now I've got two ways to do that. I could remove that with the gouge, it would be quite quick. So let's actually do that first. That'll save a bit of time, and it'll also prevent me from wearing out my burr too quickly. So I can just cut in sideways like this with my gouge and reduce my wall thickness closer to the finished thickness. It's just a 40/40 grind. And then just trail it out. So that's a scrape with the wing there. It's just peel cutting into the side, but not with bevel contact. So we've got it closer to our finished wall thickness. If I want to now, I can clean up the wall thickness, making sure my negative rake scraper is going in parallel to the lathe bed. And I've got my ideal thickness. I'm going to just push it in straight, holding it against the side. When it gets to the bottom, it will not grab. And then what we're looking to do is flatten it across the bottom. So I'm making myself a little flat spot in the middle, making sure I don't go past center. Now, whilst the burr is on here, it's going to cut pretty good and abrade that surface really well. But the burr will wear out. So once the burr is worn out, I need to be thinking about resharpening it. But I think we might have got that at that. So, in fact, let's use a negative rake here as well, because that way we've got this surface cleaned up as well. I think I've got across the bottom, and I think I've got clean into the corner. So let's slow the lathe down. See if I can get most of the dust out with the towel. And that looks pretty good in there. So the burr, because I used 10V, lasted long enough to do the face, across the bottom. It's flat and clean, no torn grain, got a super sharp corner. This is really good. And now able to put my male tenon on here. That's going to then fit into my female fit on the base in a little while. So that I'm going to come from side grain rather than into the end grain. So we'll reposition our tool rest around the other way around, and I'm going to use a square beating and parting tool for that, because I get a little burr on the side of here that I can use sometimes to clean up the end grain coming in from the side. So coming in from the side here, setting my tool rest parallel to the lathe. Going to decide how long we want the tenon to be on this for the fit. So here we're going to swap out for the square beating and parting tool. This also has a burr on it, and I'm going to use it as a parting tool, but not in a cut manner. If I drop in here to get my cut, it'll fray the edge and split it out. Now we don't want this to be very long, and I'm looking for a snap fit, not a suction fit on my box. So the length of my tenon is going to be around about this length. So we're going to come in here, and we want to have a really good fitting lid. So I'm going to take this down to about half the thickness here, and we want this to be parallel. So coming in here, going down about half thickness. Coming in there. Now I want that to be parallel, so I'm eyeing it to make sure this is parallel. Now there's a little burr on the side of the chisel here. I'm going to use that to clean up the end grain right there. And then we make sure that's parallel. Make sure it definitely isn't tapered like a dovetail. So here I've got the chisel at a little bit of an angle. Make sure I'm getting it parallel. I'm sighting that and right into the corner. And the finish of that will be really good. And there's still a little bit of a burr left on here. Now the second thing I'm going to do is a separation line right here to here. That's going to hide the joint later. Well, when I say hide the joint, it'll actually make it obvious so people don't realize that we've got a bit of grain missing from the wood. So that is another step. Again, I use the side of the chisel to use the burr. So again, using burrs to get us a great finish. So we have no torn grain here. Super sharp. Now obviously I would sand at this stage, but for today's purpose we're going to move on. This is now ready to fit into this, so we need to get this ready now. Again, miss this green handle bit. So setting this up, I'll do the same with the gouge. I will take it down around about 50% of the material off of the gouge before I use the negative rake scraper. Now that negative rake scraper completely finished this area here, the side wall and the face here, so it's lost most of its burr, so it might be time to give it a quick touch up, but let's just see where we get to initially. So looking at the thicknesses, we can mark on here what we need to remove. So I'm needing to remove about this amount of material. Making sure you're not dovetailing this, it wants to be parallel. And this will reduce the amount of time I need with the negative rake scraper. Now, the negative rake scraper has a long bevel on it because of its thickness, so I'm going to move the tool rest back so I can get it into position without being on the bevel. I want to be on the substrate, not on the bevel. Let's make sure it's running parallel, bring it from here, and then let's skim this surface. The nice thing is when this gets to the bottom, it doesn't grab. If I was using a conventional scraper like this with a single angle, when it gets to the bottom of the cut, it wants to grab because then I'll have immediate surface contact across the full width. When I'm using just a small part pushing in, it's not so aggressive, but when a conventional scraper hits the bottom on the end grain, it's going to engage and it's going to pull in really hard. Even if I hone the burr off this, it still remains aggressive because of the single angle and the burr and the edge being parallel to the base of the tool. With the negative rake, because the burr and the edge are downhill from the base, that's what makes the geometry work and prevents it from being aggressive. Now again, negative rake scrapers, if you go past center, keep cutting. So here I'm going to push on the left side of the center, create myself a little bit of a space, create a little bit of depth. I can cut sideways with the chisel, like so. using the side. And then let's see if we can get the corner clean. And now we need to clean up the bottom. So now where we want to concentrate, because that's end grain, we want to be careful in the middle that we don't go past middle, and we want to go back and forth. Now I can feel the burr is primarily gone on this. It's not interacting very well. I'm having to push. So it's almost time to give this a fresh burr. Yeah, I'm not getting the reaction. I'm working hard. A negative rake scraper, so you can hear it vibrating. It's telling me, hey, the burr is gone. It's not going to work. So I'll be back in a moment and put a fresh burr on that. So fresh burr on this, we'll let it interact. Make sure the burr is facing upwards. There it is. And take it across the bottom. Oh, and a massive difference. So super good control there. Cleaning up the bottom, so I barely have to sand this. And I've got quite a bit of overhang there. But it's still working really well. It's not aggressive. Working right to the middle. Right into the corner. Make sure the corner is clean. And then let's clean up the face. And that is a cut from a while back, and the wood is warped a bit, so it's bringing that back to true. So what we have here is a matching top and bottom on thickness. Clean base, but we don't have any male or female here yet. So what we want to do is we want to be able to use the negative rake to fit the male into the female. So what I'm looking to do is cut the right width so it just fits in slightly, but with a taper. Then we straighten out the taper until this goes in with a snap fit. So let's show you how that works. So for now, let's try by making it too small and getting a start. So we start in a little way here. And let's just confirm that that is too small. And then we know we can take that to full depth. So definitely too small. So we'll take that to full depth, which is going to be the depth of the male tenon here, plus a tiny bit more at this stage. And then we'll widen it a little bit more. So coming here now, I'm going to put some deliberate angle on it. So I'm not going to dovetail it outward, sorry. I'm going to dovetail inwards here. That's about the depth. Now I'm going to step that a tiny bit at the beginning and check my fit on that. So it's getting closer to my fit, but not there yet. So we'll take that to full depth and repeat the process. So back to full depth with a slight taper. Let's set ourselves a new spot right there. Let's try the fit, and I'm probably still one short. So this way I'm guaranteed to get the depth right and then finally get the fit. Not going quite yet. So again, full depth, and then step it again. And this might take 3 or 4 attempts each time. Down to full depth. Do a little test step right there. And once it fits that test step, we'll take it to full depth, but with a taper, and then we'll ease the taper off. That's starting to fit right there. Just there. So that's our fit. So we know that if we take that down at a taper, check it, then we even it out to almost parallel to get our final snap fit. So this is where you have to be careful. We do not want to take off any more than we have to. So very subtle angle here. We'll check that now. I know it's going to be too tight, but this is where negative rake scraping is very good because it's very precise. So it's starting to go in there, but I said too tight because it's still tapered in. So now we'll straighten that out a little bit, and then we'll end up with a snap fit. And then what we need to do, we'll just need to clean up this edge here very lightly, because as I'm pushing in, it's making that edge just fur up a little bit. So less is more here. You'd rather do it a couple of times than take one big cut. So this time I'm just going to straighten out a little bit, but just a tiny bit. It's still going to be a tiny taper, 1 or 2 degrees. Clean up the bottom now. Clean up the side there. And let's see what we've got. And there's our fit. And that's a snap fit. So it takes a snap to get it off, snap to get it in. And when we line up the grain, because I put a separation line here, you can't see that the grain is a slightly mismatched because it's at a slight angle. And your eye alludes to that. And so now we're ready to shape the outside and the end here. So we can turn the end off with the gouge, but then get the final finish with the negative rake. Now, this is a snap fit. It's not ultra tight. It's actually just right. Now, you could have taken a little less off and sanded that last little bit in here, but today I'm not going through a sanding process. I'm simply going through the process of showing negative rake and how effective it is. Now here, if I want to turn the top off, we need to check to see how much wall thickness we've got. So let's take my pencil and check that. So we should be pretty close because I measured it out by eye before. We know that if we take away the tenon mark, we'll have just enough. Now, the reason I want to take away the tenon mark is often it'll break into the surface here and leave some damage on the grain here. So clean it up with the 40-40 gouge, and then what we're going to do, we'll finish it with negative rake to show you how effective negative rake is on the very top. I'm going to give it a very slight, in fact, let's make it perfectly straight and then show you slightly domed as well, because they're two different effects. Now, one thing I am going to do, because I don't want this to spin in here, and I'm using pretty good friction fit, but if I'm too aggressive with the gouge, I'll make it spin and that would burn it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little piece of masking tape on here just for a moment to hold it in place to make sure it doesn't spin on me whilst I use the gouge, because the gouge is a little bit more aggressive than a negative rake. As we know, masking tape isn't particularly strong, but just stops that initial spin and creep. So I'm going to also put it on backwards. That way it doesn't unwind. And I'm only using it temporarily here while I get the outside. And I'm going to go around twice. Tear it off, and then I'm going to rub it in with my nails so I get a good bind on here. And this is going to give me enough strength to work this, and then I'm going to remove my tenon. So bringing up my tool rest, not super close because I'm going to be finishing it with negative rake, but I have options with negative rake on the top. I don't have to use a round bar one. I could use a skew on its side. I could use a replaceable blade, negative rake scraper, all will be ideal. So let's make it fairly straight across right now. We know we don't have a lot of spare material. I can go up to around about here. That would be my max. Any thinner than that, and I'm going to make the lid too thin. Okay, so from here, going in straight across, taking my 40-40, guiding where it needs to be. I'm a little high with my tool rest because it's set for the scraper, but I'll leave it for now, it'll be fine. And now, not an aggressive cut. But I'm going to dome this very slightly for the first cut, and then we'll straighten it up. Now remember at the end, watch how I lift the handle and disengage the wing. So the wing is going below the side grain, and I'm going to a slice position with the nose so I don't leave a hole in the top of the box. Now, negative rake here, lots of choices. I can go back to my round bar. I can go to my beading and parting tool. I can go to a skew. I can go ground straight across chisel here. And I can also go to a very wide replaceable blade. So let's show you the very wide replaceable blade. The advantage with the replaceable blades is we're able to offer these in 15V, which means I get an exceptionally long life. And this is where this is exceptional. I can clean up this surface really good. The gouge does a good job, but there are always tool marks. And we're hearing a little bit of the wood there because it's fairly thin. But this is slightly domed. And this is 15V. Now it's got a slight curvature on it, that's why I'm able to go past center, because I'm not using it across the center. This has given me an exceptionally good finished surface on here. This would only need sanding with something like a 220 to 320 on here. But as I said, that's slightly domed. If I want to straighten that out, that's really easy. I can use the same chisel. Or in this case, I could use a ground straight across 10V. The options are not unlimited with negative rake, so this one is a 10V ground straight across. I can use it also to cut a little bit sideways to straighten that out. So right now there's a dome on here, let's take that out. Burr is facing up. I'm going to come across like this, and I'm going to use the side of the chisel a little bit here, and then forwards into it. And that way I'm able to straighten this out and make this perfectly square. So the finish on here is exceptional. You can't match it even with a gouge. Conventional scraper would be aggressive. And let's see what we've got. Let's check it with a pencil to see if we got flat across. Yep, we got that perfectly flat across. Got an exceptional finish on here. And now I would be able to turn the outside of the box, finish this area, and then I would jam chuck it to finish the base. And what I mean by that is I would simply take this out, grab a scrap piece of wood, take the lid off, and jam chuck it to fit. But I would want to get this area here, if I'm just making it parallel, at least this area here, somewhat finished, either with a roughing gouge or the side of a 40/40 works just great. So that we know that this area is finished, and we only have to finish the last little bit and the base later. Again, can do that with negative rake. So here I have the option of using the wing of the gouge like a skew to plane this area. And get this to where I want it. If I wanted to add some extra decoration or detail in here, but here I'm just using this, the wing, the bevel is in contact. I'm finishing not all the way up to the chuck, but here, and this would be sandable now. And then we'll finish the base later, but we can take this off now. We'll take the lid off. We can see we've got a great fit in there. We can see there's dust in there, but we have good tool finish. The fit is right where we want it. Snap fit. And then we can just work the outside of this later on a jam chuck. And jam chuck, again, the fit for the jam chuck is ideal to do because we need to finish this area and turn off the bottom. Then we have a snap fit box that only needed a light bit of sanding, which I skipped for the purpose of just showing negative rake scraping on this. And it goes back together, that snap fit each time. Really good. And the nice thing about this is because we've got an even wall thickness here and here, this box will never change. It'll have the same fit today, tomorrow, the next day. If you make one part thicker than the other, then they move at different rates over time because one's absorbing and one is giving off moisture because it's changing moisture content every day because of humidity. So we have this great fit. It just now needs putting into a jam chuck of some kind here to finish off the bottom. And again, I would negative rake scrape that because the inside is already completely done. So in the past, billiard balls were made from ivory and they were turned using a chisel on its side, but instead of using the burr like I will be using today on wood, they would have honed that off. You can't use a conventional scraper on ivory because it would grab. And this allows for extreme accuracy to be able to make a super round sphere. So what I've got here is a block of wood that I've turned down the round and I've got it approximately the same length as I have diameter. I'm going to make it into a rough sphere right now, and then I'm going to jam chuck it. Use a jam chuck to turn the other half of the sphere. Then we'll check it, and then we'll make it into a perfect sphere using a groove technique that we cut down to using negative rake. So from here, I've got my block of wood in the chuck. What I'm looking to do is approximately mark the halfway line on this right now and make sure I don't take off too much. Less is more here. If we take off too much, we can't put it back and we'll end up with a smaller sphere. So halfway looks to be around about here. So we need to keep this line on here. We don't want that to disappear. We want a little line here. That doesn't want to disappear. Let's widen that slightly more. Now, we're going to use a 40/40 gouge because it's very fast at this, because it's the only gouge technique in the world that allows you to take large volume directly to a sandable surface. So from here, I'm just going to create the sphere cut, which is a half round. And again, being careful not to take off too much. We don't want to make it smaller than the final diameter at this stage. And I think we need one more light cut, and then we're ready to jam chuck this. Okay. So let's take this out right now. Let's put in our jam chuck. And I'm pushing my luck a little bit here with the jaws, or right at the limit. Yes, so we're going to change out this chuck. So here I'm going to go to 4-inch jaws rather than the big Mark 3-inch jaws, and that way we'll get a better fit. What we're looking to do here is to hollow this out enough that it will grip slightly before the black line. We grip less than half a circle, so we have access to more than half a circle. And so we're going to hollow this out rapidly with a gouge, but then what we'll do is we'll do the final fit with a swept back negative rake scraper to get a precise fit to grip it exactly how we need it to, and the taper that it'll fit into will be very shallow. So cutting in here, let's level off the face. This is where the 40/40 is really good. It can take large volume, as you can see, directly to a reasonable finish here. Now let's start swinging in, so swap my feet to do that. And what we're looking to do here is primarily trying to cut side grains. So going sideways, sideways, making space. Now here I'm going to use the side to level from to get the cut started, because I'll start with what's called a live cut and I don't want it to skip. Now I'm directly cutting into end grain, but that's okay, you can still do it. And then let's just use this as a glorified scraper right now. So you can see it's not ideal, So let's transfer over to a negative rake scraper that can do this much better. So these are both negative rake scrapers. Both have a top angle, an included angle of around 40 degrees. However, this one is a replaceable blade one. This one is one that I've made up from a piece of solid 10V. So ideally, this is a little easier because as the blade wears down, I can just replace it and I don't have to keep grinding the top surface. So let's get this set up now because we need to adjust the height to get the fit in here, but we can see how close we are. We have a little ways to go, but we'll get that final fit with negative rake. Now the negative rake wouldn't care about going into the end grain or the side grain, it works the same on both, but here what we're looking to do is to get close to a fit for the sphere with a very subtle angle. So it probably needs at least one more try, but we don't want to take too much off. Oh yes, plenty to go. So it'll still take at least another 1/8 of an inch there. And still a little more to go. Okay, so we're starting to get a fit there, but we're not close enough to the line. We need a little bit closer, and that'll give us that really good grip, because right now I can pop that out. So as we get closer to the line, and we keep this angle very subtle, very shallow, we'll get a better and better grip. And the inside here is just clearance. None of that is going to contact the sphere, or at least we don't want it to. So getting very close there. Make sure we take the dust out. We don't want to be on dust. And I think my angle here is too severe. So it's going to grip it, but I can pop it out too easy. That means my angle is too severe. I want it to be a more shallow angle. So taking the negative rake, let's come in a little straighter here. Definitely not undercut, because undercut would mean it would start to fit and then it would pop inside the jam chuck. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here we're good. Now, what we want to do, we could bring up the tailstock if I had a center mark there, but I don't really have one. I'm going to line it up using this here, just knocking it in to make sure it's running relatively true. And a sphere is a sphere, so that's going to be close enough. Let's turn this side. We know the length is correct, so this will be no problems to make it fit. Now we know we're at the correct length for this, so again, we don't want to turn too much away, so we're going to leave that little bit, not cut. So with the gouge here, now don't be aggressive, and if you're worried about it popping out, then bring up the tailstock, but make sure you don't put a hole in there with the tailstock. So not an aggressive cut here. We don't want to pull it out the chuck. Notice I went for a lower volume there, I was coming in too early. And now we're getting a little bit closer to the finished shape. Again, doing it in 2 cuts where I think I'm being too aggressive. Now we can check this. Now it's not a perfect sphere for sure, but it's close. And we can do a little check here by reversing it 90 degrees. So here I'm going to use my palm and I'm going to fulcrum it out. Now let's make sure the chuck is tight, because we don't want to move the chuck in the jaws, because then it won't run true. We put it in the other way and we can see how close a fit we are. So we can see we're a little bit high here. Not so bad here. So that end is a little bit long. I'm going to put that in one more time and shorten it by a tiny amount. And then we're ready to do the groove that we'll work to in a moment. So just tapping that in, not too much, because it's gripping really tight. So I'm just going to shorten this a little bit here, the whole length, because I think it's a little bit longer, not much, maybe just a 32nd or a 16th longer than we need. And again, using my palm to fulcrum it out. There we go. And see how it fits. So that's pretty close. Definitely not perfect, because you can feel it. You can see the shadow, but pretty close. But that's not a perfect sphere. We want a perfect sphere. So what we need to do, we're going to take the finish point of that cut there, and the finish point of that cut there, and line them up. A little bit of dust in here. We definitely don't want any dust in here, because that's going to make it run out of true, especially when we reverse it. So no dust at all. Let's locate that up. Now, so what I've done, I've gone from spindle turning with the grain running this way, to bowl turning. Then we're going to put a groove in this, and I'm going to turn the grain at 90 degrees so it's easier to see the groove later when we actually use that as our mark out. So in fact, let's just make sure we mark the full center in this direction also, and this direction also. We need to line those two lines up. So let's bring up the tool rest. See how close I am. I'm fairly close. Let's give it a little tap in. Now, if you're radically out of shape, then you do need to work it more. So I'm pretty close. I'm within about a 16th all the way around. Let's check. So you can see I'm a little further in that side than the other side. So I'm just going to tap that a little more on this side in. Check that again, and then we'll cut a groove right through the very center and the highest points. So we're right on the money here, here. Now to do that, don't do it with a skew. You need to do it with a parting tool. So I've got a parting tool freshly sharpened with a burr on it. Now, don't use a wide parting tool. Even this 1/8 one is a little bit broader than I'd like. A 16th might be better. I'm going to form a perfect circle around here where I break through all of the surface, the high and the low spots, till I get a perfect circle. And once I've got that, that is the surface I'm going to work to. And I'm also going to paint that with a pencil so it's visible later. So right in that line, center of the parting tool in here, use it as a negative rake scraper here, going in just enough to get it down to the round. No more. We don't need to go any more. And I got a little carried away there, so I maybe went in a 30-second more than I needed to. Let's paint that black. You'll see why in a minute. This is what we're going to work to make a perfect circle, because we know we've just cut a perfect circle in a rough circle. So we're going to turn it back around, put it in square, so use your lines, give it a little tap in. Now we're going to negative rake scrape to the bottom of that. Now if your groove had to go very deep because you weren't very round, then you might need to use a gouge. But you've got to be careful when you use a gouge, you remove a lot more material. Now I could skim a tiny bit off this with a gouge maybe and reduce my amount of negative rake scraping time. But for argument's sake today, I'm just going to do it exactly with negative rake. Now, this is one of the times where I set my tool rest at 45 degrees to the piece. And the reason for that is because I'm using negative rake, it's a lot more comfortable. I wouldn't be able to use this at 45 degrees to start a gouge cut. It wouldn't be viable. Now, the options to use negative rake scraping. I can use a small skew, but I can only get the burr on one side, so I'll be working in this direction if the skew's using this one because the burr's on this side. I've got another skew over here that's bigger, and the burr is on the opposite side, so I'd be using that in a different direction. So you can see they're skewed two different directions, or you can use a ground straight across chisel, this one here, and I can again go all the way around. And I also have the option of using a larger replaceable blade one here, and I can start from here and go all the way around. There are lots of options when it comes to negative rake scraping. The main rule is that it has a secondary angle on the top and a bottom angle that creates a burr, and that included angle needs to be around 40 degrees for a big burr, maximum included angle of 70. Any greater and the burr is too small, it doesn't last very long. Now I know this is a 15V replaceable blade one, so I'm going to try this one because it'll last longer, and I've got a little bit more to remove there than ideal. I do not need a long handle, so let's just go to a 12 here. That's more than enough. Now you have to be careful. Here's my lowest point here. Right here. So that's where I'm going to take the least off. I can mark that now. So let's not remove that right now. Let's start working in the middle. So my tool rest is a little bit low here for this particular negative rake scraper. So let's take it up. So almost on center height, that'll be good. And a little more angle because this is a skewed negative rake scraper. So I'm a bit more comfortable if I come a little closer to the top here. And we can work our way around. Now don't be aggressive with this because it's very effective. It's very fast, a lot faster than you think. So I'm working either side of the groove. Now I can trail my nail and feel it. And I'm breaking through, very close to breaking through in places. So let's see if I actually got a little carried away there. Oh, not quite, but I'm very close here. So almost breaking through there, tiny bit here, none there. So I don't want to remove any more here or here. There's a tiny bit on the end. Let's get that cleaned up. Right there, and then let's work that down and then through the line this time because now we're getting closer. So check early, check often, and then here a little bit at the top. So here I can go past halfway, but we don't want to remove all of the line quite yet. We don't want to do that till the very final moment So you want to keep stopping and checking early. So we've got through here, there's a trace of the shadow of the line there, but from here up, there's still a little way to go. So let's work this area only. Do not work down at the bottom, so get that closer. And negative rake is incredibly effective. It's super accurate, super easy. Just make sure you still have a burr. Now this is a 15V, so this will hold the burr longer than any other steel in the world, because 15V is the highest vanadium content steel in the world. Oh, we've got all of it's gone. All right, so I'm still seeing a little trace of the pencil mark, so right there. So I didn't take off too much, it's just a shadow of it, really close. I need a little bit more at the top. Now this one here, because it's angled this direction, I'm struggling to get in there. So I'm just going to quickly take away some of the jam chuck with my gouge, because it's in the way. There, not cutting into the jam chuck where it's gripping, just giving myself enough space to get my negative rake around a little further. And less is more. Let's check it before we go too far. And let's see where we're at. Okay, so still a tiny bit to go here. And the rest of it looks good. That's great. So just a very small amount. Now remember, I'm moving all the way around here because this is where the sphere is going down the other side. So very little. And now we have enough access to more than halfway. So when we spin this around, we'll be able to get access to the rest of the sphere. So let's take this out and spin this around. Now, it might not fit this time. There, it does go in, but it's too big a diameter. Remember, there's a slight chamfer on that taper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten this very slightly. So just with a gouge, I'm just going to cut out and shorten it. Notice I'm cutting outwards. The reason I'm cutting outwards there is I don't want to damage that inner edge. Now make sure none of this is touching inside there because we've shortened it. No, we're still good. So now we grip just past half, or just below halfway. We can give this a little tap in. We start the process again. So again, I have quite a bit of material to remove here, not so much here. So I'm going to work the top first, and let's see what we've got using the same negative rake scraper. And because it's a sphere, if I didn't put it in perfectly position, it's still good because a sphere is a sphere. It just means it's just rotated on the grain slightly. So let's work the top here down a little way. You can see the high spot there, close to the middle. Work it a little bit more, but let's check early to see where we're at. And let's mark it if we need to. So we're about even wall thickness all the way around. What we've got to remove. Let's go again. Now, if you're using a lower grade steel, M2, M4, M42, then I recommend by this stage you might be considering maybe putting a fresh burr on it. But I've got probably 3 to 4 good minutes of negative rake scraping with 15V on this amount of surface. So just starting to break through, almost breaking through, a little bit more. So now I can start that black line to start to disappear. And now less is more. Check it early. So I'm just very lightly on the surface. So I'm getting within a couple of thou on this, on accuracy. So just a trace of it left, which is good there. We need a little bit more, not there. So let's just work the end. And then we're going to reverse it and check it to see how accurate we are. That's when you can feel how accurate you are. So negative rake is exceptional at this. It's so easy to control. Couldn't get this accuracy with the gouge. And if we used a conventional scraper, it would be pulling at it, and we'd want to pull it off a layer. So you can see just a hair, there's a witness mark right there through it. I can see it. So if I skim that a tiny bit more at the end, and once more all the way around, taking off maybe a couple of thou. So that's got a little bit more witness mark. Let's go once all the way around super light. Just taking off 1, maybe 0.02 of an inch. Let's see where we're at. Okay, now, we don't know how truly round it is because as we've made the shadow disappear, did you remove too much? So we take it, we pop it out, we can feel it, and it feels really good. But the best way to check is now make it again like bowl grain. Instead of the grain running this way, make it run this way. We can put it in and then take the grain across so we can clearly see it, tap it in, and you can feel how round it is. And you can hear how round this is. There's a little bit, a tiny bit out by just a few thou. So you've got options. If you want to get it absolutely perfect, you could do the groove one more time and skim less off. But on this is pretty close. On this, I wouldn't negative rake scrape it in this position here. If I was going to do it again, I'd put the groove in and go what have you. But you can see, if you look at the shadow, I can see I'm probably out by maybe 2/1000 of an inch. And again, you could repeat the process, but right now, this is basically ready for sanding. So if you sand it in this position with the grain running this way, it'll take some of those high spots out that I've created from doing it from 2/2. Flip it over, sand it in this direction. Again, it'll take the high spots out, and then reverse it to sand it in the normal grain direction with the spindle running with the grain this way for spindle turning. And that is how we make a sphere with negative rake scraping. And I'd say this is 99% right. Could probably do with one more, either sanding whilst the grain's in an opposite direction, or put the groove in one more time, but very shallow and skimming a tiny bit out. But this is a quick way to make a sphere, and most people wouldn't be able to tell that that's out by 1 to 2/1000 of an inch. That's pretty close for a sphere. And spheres are great, you know, in the sense that if you put a bunch of these on a table in a bowl, people are very tactile. People absolutely love to pick them up. I much prefer them to an egg shape, and it shows off the grain really well. This is a piece of what is called, I call it olive ash. Some people call it brown ash. It just has a dark hard ash, and the finish on this is exceptional. This would sand very easily. There is no torn grain on this. And the denser the wood that you use for this, the better negative rake scraping gets. It gets even more effective on woods like ebony, blackwood, cocobolo, lignum vitae. So that's a sphere completed with negative rake scraping. That's been done since, we've been making bowls on a lathe.